I am Rahul, working with Mindpad Solutions, Noida. This is a brief introduction about me, and in this video, we'll be discussing about the SQL Server constraints. Uh, we'll be discussing about the primary key constraint, foreign key constraint, default constraint, and check constraint and the unique key constraint, and as well as we'll be showing up the different options when we try to modify the one table. Basically, the cascading the referential integrity as well. Okay, all right. So let's quickly move on to the SQL Server Management Studio. Let's create a new database. Let's name it as sample. See, okay. Let's add a couple of tables here. Let's add one table. Let me name it as column as first column as ID. Data type is say int, not null. And second column is gender. Data type is and varchar not null. Let me set the ID as the primary key of this table. Let's name this table as tbl gender. Say okay. Let's add one more table here. Let me name the column as ID again. Data type as int, not null. Name and varchar not null. Email and varchar not null. And gender ID. Let's keep it as integer. For the time being, let's keep it as nullable. Okay. Let's make the ID as primary key here as well, and then let's name this table as TBL person. All right. Let's add a sample data here in this couple of tables. Right click, say edit top 200 rows. And we'll be adding a data first in the TBL gender table, whose ID is 1, gender is say male, is 2, and gender is female, 3, and gender is unknown. And this TBL person as well, will be adding some sample data. Let's add one here. AA is the name, AA@com. Gender ID, let's keep it as 1. Let's do here as name as BB this time. Gender ID 2. Let's keep the gender ID 3 this time, and last record will be adding the 4. Here we'll not be adding the gender ID. Let's keep it as null. Okay. Save this. Let's add a query window, and let's select star from both these two tables. Execute these tables. You can see here the data is getting populated in this table. Now what is the actual problem in this table? Let me show you. Let me try to add one more record into this table, TBL person, say values, right? Then let me add a 5th record here. Let I keep the ID same as 5. Okay. Let's insert this record. It's inserted successfully. Select the records again. Right now, what is the problem in this table? Now, suppose I need to know the gender of this the person name having the name as EE. I cannot know because this gender ID is 5, which is actually not present in my master table. which is the gender table. Alright, so we need to have a relationship that this gender ID needs to be present in this table as well. Right, so let's add this constraint. This table constraint is known as foreign key constraint. Right, so let's try to add this. Just move to TBL person table, select the relationships, say add, expand this table in column specifications, select the primary key table from which we need to map. We need to map from TBL gender table, the column name is ID, and the foreign key table is the TBL person only, and the column name we need to map is gender ID. Let's give a meaningful name to the relationship name, gender ID. Say okay, close this, save this. Now say yes. Now you can see here the error get encoded during the save process. Now why this error is? Let me show you why this error is. If you can see here, we are already having a record here which is having the gender ID as 5, which is not present in the TBL gender table. Okay, so basically it cannot add a constraint here. Now if I go on delete this record from the TBL person table, now this record is no more present here. Let's execute this. Okay, now if I move to TBL person table again, I select the relationship again. Let's delete this relationship. Let's add it once again. Expand the table in column specifications. Select the table, primary key table, and the foreign key table. Right. Say okay. Close this. Say yes. Now we'll have successfully added a foreign key relationship to this table. Now what I'll do is we'll try to insert this record again. Okay. Now here we are getting the error. Insert statement conflicted with the foreign key constraint. So this is all about the foreign key constraint. It basically prevents or basically validates the data to be entered. Alright. Now moving to the next part. Now suppose I write query something like this: ID, name, email, values. Let's give us 6 ff@gmail.com. Right, now let's try to insert this record. It's inserted successfully, right? Let's execute the select statement. Now what is the issue you can see in this table? The issue you can see in this table is, suppose my having the gender ID as null, but which is not there in this TBL gender table. But since we have kept this gender ID in this TBL person table as nullable, if you can see here, null is allowed here. So that is where this problem is happening again. Now this can be avoided if we add the default constraint here. Now how do we go about that? Move to TBL person table again. Right, you can see here the design view. Just enter the default value, say 3. If the gender is not known for an employee, we'll add a value 3, which is unknown here, 3. Right, let's try to save this. Now let's try to add one more record and let's see if the same getting assigned or not. Right, the record got inserted successfully. Now you can see here the newly inserted record has an ID 3. Then this is the default constraint. Now you can see here as well. Now let me refresh this both the tables. TBL person table. You can expand the keys to get the foreign key relationship here, which we have set up now, and the constant naming the default. DF stands for default. TBL person gender ID, which we have set as 3. Okay, so this is the all about the foreign key and the default key constraint. Now what we'll do is we'll try to delete a record from the TBL gender table where say employee ID where the ID is 2, right? What will happen is TBL gender where ID is 2, this record should get deleted, but since we are all this record is already being referencing in this TBL person table, let's see what happens. This since we have implemented the foreign key constraint, it's showing the delete statement conflicted. It's showing me an error. How do we modify the same? Let's go to the constraint and say modify. Now by default, if we go to the foreign key relationship, insert and then update specification, your delete rule is set as no action. You can set it as 3 ways are there. You can set it as cascade, set null, or set default. Now suppose I set it as set default. I close it. I save it and I save the same again. Now what will happen is if I go on delete this record. First let's select all of the records. Now if I go on delete this record, then it will, for 2 it should set me as default value, which is 3, which we have already set. Right, so let's execute this statement. Let's try to run this query again. You can see here the BB gender ID of BB has been set as 3, which is default value. Similarly, you can set it as set null and cascade delete as well. Okay, now so set null is same, which we can set it as set null. Upon deleting, it will set the value as null. And now see if I have got it, go on modify and say cascade it. Say close it. And I save the same. Now what will happen is if I delete a record from TBL gender table, it will also cascade delete will happen, and it will also delete the record from the TBL person table as well. Suppose I go on delete the record from TBL gender 1, then this record having the person name as A should also get deleted. Let's try to execute this query. Let's run this. As you can see here, the record having the name as A is no longer exist here. Right, so this we were referring as, this was all about the referential cascade integrity. Now we'll move to next part, which is check constraint. Let's add one more table here. Say ID and let's set it as not null. Name and where get not null. Email and where get not null. And let's add one column as age integer. Let's keep it as null. Okay, let's set the ID as primary key for this table. Let's name this table as TBL persons. Say let's add a couple of data here. Edit top 200 rows. ID as 1. Just keep the age as 50. minus 8 cc. Let's leave it as blank. Right, if I move to the query base and I select a tbl percent table. Now you can see here the records get populated, but there is a problem in this table. It now age, as we know, practically it should be a positive integer. Suppose I need to implement a check into this, it should be lie between say 0 to 150. I need to prevent the incorrect data to be entered by the user in this table. So I can go on and add constraint into this table. Right click and say constraint. It will open up your check constraint. Write an expression, expand this. Age should be greater than 0 and should be less than 150. Say okay. You can rename it as check constraint tbl person age. Close. Save this constraint. Now you can see the constraint is not getting applied on this table. The reason is because we are already having the incorrect data into this table. Now what is that incorrect data? You go on select here. You can see here the incorrect data is there. Now if I go on delete this table, delete this entry, id equal to 2. Now let's try to add constraint again. We can add it up again. Let's delete this constraint for the time being and let's add a fresh one. It should be greater than 0 and less than 150. Let's try to add this constraint now. This constraint get added successfully now. Now suppose I go on try to add a record into this table, insert into record, and now I enter a value say more than 150. Since we have already added the check constraint into this, then it's giving the check constraint error. Now if I modify and go and add the 55 here, then the same allows me. Okay. Now one thing in this check constraint I would like to show here is, suppose I modify it to null and make it as 5. This check constraint expression returns as a boolean expression, which is true or false. Now since we are adding the, in place of age we are adding the null, which returns as anonymous value, which is unknown value, and in this case this constraint returns true and this allows the null true as well. Okay, so let's try to run this. Let's try to select this table. You can see here this get it added successfully. Okay, so the validation check is applied on that based on the return value, If I add any value greater than 150 or less than 0, it will prevent me to add that. But in case of null value, this boolean expression returns true. Okay, now this was the check constraint. Now we left with one last constraint, which is unique constraint. Unique constraint, it's very much similar to the primary constraint. Uh, the major difference between two is primary key constraint we can have only one in the table, but the unique constraint can we have multiples as well in the table. The second difference between the primary key constraint and the unique key constraint is primary key constraint does not allow the null values, whereas the unique key constraint allows. Okay, so in this table only we'll be applying the unique key constraint TBL person. Let's try to uh, make the email ID column as unique. Okay, so we'll be adding here simple syntax: alter table TBL persons, add constraint unique TBL persons email, and the column name which is email. Okay, let's run this. This constraint added successfully. Now suppose I add the same record here, but I kept the email ID as same. And since we have added the unique constraint on this email ID, then it should prevent me to allow, right? You can see here violation of unique key constraint. Now if I go on modify it, then it will allow me to insert the data successfully. Let's check it. Just get it successfully added. So these were the constraints that we discussed now. Let's summarize it. Primary key constraint, which is only one and only one can be exist in a table. Foreign key constraint, to basically map the column from one table to another member to prevent the unauthorized data to be entered into the table. This foreign key constraint internally applies the cascadal referential integrity as well, and which is by default set to no action, right? So in case we try to delete a record from a table which is having a foreign key, then it will not allow you to do so until unless you set the uh, cascadal referential integrity mode to say set default, set null, or cascade. uh, Third is the default constraint. We can set the default value of a column, right? But the default value will not be applied in case we are supplying, in case the value is allowed to be null as well in that column. The check constraint basically to check the range of values to be set into a column, and it returns a boolean expression true or false. Based on that, the insertion is allowed or restricted. The unique constraint is again the very much same as the primary key constraint, but it allows the null value as well, and it can exist. It A table can have multiple unique key constraint as well. That's all for today from my side for this. Thank you very much for your listening.